Good morning, and yeah, happy Mother's Day. We just want to start off by just recognizing mothers and just say thank you for everything that you do. She didn't know I was going to say this, add to this, but I just thank you for all you do. You're a great mom, and I appreciate you so much. And we appreciate, both Brittany and I appreciate the mothers in our life, and just are so thankful for the mothers of prayer and of showing us love that have formed us into the people that we are today. So, yeah, we just want to thank you guys.
Yeah, we also know that Mother's Day can be a really hard day for some people. Whether you've experienced child loss, or parent loss, or maybe there's just tension in that relationship. And we just want to say that we recognize you too, and we see you, and we're praying with you. So, happy Mother's Day. We're really glad you're here today.
Yeah. Hey, Emily, I think the clicker isn't working for me, so you may have to advance our slides for us. So last week, Tony started us off in a new series called Blessed, and he did a really good job of kind of laying out the groundwork of what this series is going to be all about. And so I just wanted to take just a few moments this morning and just remind us of some of the things he said. So I have a couple of quotes from him. This first one is actually in your notes if you want to write it down. He said, "The blessing of God is always the presence of God. It's doing things His way and expecting His results because of who He is." Another one, he said, "Blessing is the face of God smiling down on us." He reminded us that sometimes we can just go along to get along. And then he asked this question of, have I embraced culture instead of my calling? And in doing so, miss out on living the blessed life. And I just think those quotes set the tone. And, in spite of him not wanting to start the series, he actually did a pretty good job at starting the series and kicking us off in a good direction. And so just with that mindset, that blessing, the blessing of God is not the American dream, and it's not maybe success in the way that we sometimes think of success, but the blessing of God is resting in the presence of God. And so this week, we get to speak on what that looks like to live in the blessing of God in our parenting, specifically in the early seasons of parenting, whatever that may look like for you. And so I know, if you know our family, you know that we have a 2-year-old, a toddler, and a baby. And so maybe there's 2 people in the room when I say that we're going to be talking about parenting, and you look at us and you're like, what do y'all know about parenting? You haven't even had kids go through puberty yet. You have no idea what's about to hit you. And to that I'd say, yeah, that's fair. I get that. But just hear me out. When we announced that we were pregnant at our last church, I had a friend who was probably about 20 years older than me come up to us after church, and he said, "I am so glad that you're going to be a dad, because now I'll be able to come to you and ask you all kinds of questions and just be able to look to you for all kind of wisdom and answers." And I just really appreciated him in that moment, because this is a guy 20 or so years older than me coming to me. He's not looking down on me for being younger. He's valuing the wisdom that I had to offer, even though I didn't have the experience that he had. And so this is what I was thinking in my head until he said, yeah, every new parent, first-time parent, has every answer to every problem that every parent faces. And so I'm so glad you'll be able to tell me what I'm doing wrong and how I need to fix it. So I said, thanks, Joe. Thanks a lot for that. But there's a piece of truth in that, right? There's some kind of truth in that statement. And that, Britt and I, there's a lot of things that we haven't covered yet in parenting. There's a lot of things that we have yet to come across. And so I just want to reassure you, if that is you this morning looking at us as the inexperienced parents, that you're right, and that we're not here to talk about parenting advice or tips or things to do, because we haven't been there yet. And even though we have an idea of what that might look like, we don't have the concrete evidence. But instead, our goal here this morning is to reframe what the blessing in parenting looks like. So Um, maybe you're also here, maybe you don't have kids or you don't have kids yet. And so you're thinking, oh, a sermon on parenting, great. I'm just sitting in my chair for the next half hour or so. And I just want to say, that's fair. I get that. Hearing a sermon about parenting when you're not a parent, I understand where you're coming from on that. But what if I told you that parenting is so much more about your relationship with Jesus than it is about your relationship with your kids? Would that change things? I think so. So even though our focus this morning is on parenting, that's what we're going to be talking about, I just want to encourage you to see it and hear it through the lens that Jesus is drawing us closer, and Jesus is calling us to him. And I think through that lens, no matter what season you're in, this morning can apply to you. So in other words, if for whatever reason you feel tempted to check out, or you think you have a reason to just move on and focus on what the rest of the week has to offer for you, I just want to give you this. This is just a quick summary of what we're going to be talking about this morning. And it's this, that children are a gift from God. And how you perceive them, that is, whether they are gifts or they're not, changes and shapes how you interact with, how you parent, and how you steward the children that God has placed in your life. And when we lead and we parent in this way, in God's way, then we are drawn into a deeper relationship with God our Father, and we live in the blessings of him.
Your house is noisy, not as clean as you'd like it to be. You and your husband haven't had a date night in a long time, and the laundry just keeps piling up. You just changed another diaper, you just broke up another fight, and the list of things you have to do this week seems impossible, and you're exhausted. Maybe you feel a little bit like the mom in this picture. If we're honest with ourselves, I think many of us can relate to the scenario I just said to some extent, at least some of the time. It's easy to get lost in the middle of parenting activities or just life in general, and we're doing a lot of things, good things, but next thing we know, we're not exactly sure how or why we're doing what we're doing or how we even got there in the first place. We get swallowed up in the daily grind of parenting, and then we lose sight of what we're even working towards. And we hear the phrase, children are a gift, and we even believe it, but the culture around us very rarely points to that. And I think even as us, as people, we don't always talk or act as children are a gift. Psalms 127 says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil. For he gives to his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. We're going to keep coming back to this passage as we dissect it together this morning. I just want us to think, it's really easy to see a good dad or a good mom and just recognize that. When we see a dad playing in the front yard with his kid, we think, that's a good dad. Or whenever we see a dad at a restaurant take their kid to go change the diaper without the mom doing it, we think that's a good dad. Or we might see a mom at the park and she's running around and playing with her kids and laughing with them, and we think that's a good mom. Being a good mom and a good dad are great, but in and of itself, they don't lead us to the full life that Jesus has for us, and it doesn't lead us into who he created us to be. The passage that we read said, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Allowing the Lord to build the house takes intentionality. We don't naturally just let the Lord build our house. We want to build it ourselves all the time. So what's what's missing and what moves a good parent to an intentional parent is allowing the Lord to build the house, allowing the Lord to shape our parenting, and zooming out and having this God's worldview of everything that we're doing. It takes that task of changing a diaper or playing in the front yard with our kids or going to the park, and it gives it purpose, because it's not just a good thing that we're doing. It's an opportunity. It's a gospel opportunity whenever we are seeking the Lord in that. So this is a fill-in that you can write down. When I parent with what the gospel says about God, me, my world, my children, and God's grace, I approach parenting in a completely different way. So when we take that dad playing catch in the front yard with his kid, and we zoom out, or we take that mom at the park playing with her kids, and we zoom out and we see that, and we use that as a gospel opportunity. We're not just hanging out with our kids because we want them to like us, or because we want to be a good mom or a good dad. We're spending time with them because we want to reflect the father-like love that God has for us onto our kids. We want to learn the hearts of our kids. And we make it about God and not about ourselves whenever we do that. And again, this is not natural, and it's not something that we can do on our own. It said, unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It's in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest. Unless we ourselves are spending time in the Word, we're seeking the Lord, we're leaning in His direction all day, not even just in the morning, then our parenting is in vain. Or maybe if you're not a parent, whatever we're doing that day is in vain. Because I don't think that just applies to parents. We can be doing a lot of good things and so easily just get lost in all the things that we're doing and miss the intentional God zoomed out worldview that can help us as individuals and be able to give us what we need to reflect God's love to the people around us. The next part said, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb, a reward. So children are a heritage, a reward. Or another way to put it is, children are a gift. Back in the Bible times, parenting was very community-driven. It was parent-led, but the community was very involved in it. And I think that's kind of the culture we like to push here with circles, but it was the norm back in the Bible times, even for non-Christian people. And I say that to say, it's on us as parents and as the church, whether you're a parent or not, to be sure that our kids and the kids around us feel like they are a gift. So think about it this way. You might be out in public, your kids hear they're a gift, you've told them they're a gift, and you're at Walmart and somebody says, wow, you've really got your hands full. Or maybe you've said that before. Or maybe you're talking with your friend and they ask how you're doing, and you say, I'm doing really good. I'm stressed. My kids are wearing me out. They're making me have to run around to all their activities all the time. Or maybe you're saying, somebody has said to you, just wait till you get to the teenage years. That's the hard part. Or you'll be so glad when you get out of the toddler and baby years. That was my least favorite part of parenting. Right? We hear these things, and I've been guilty of saying I'm worn out because of my kids. But I don't think that we have a bad heart, or that those statements even come from a bad heart. And I think that they can be completely true. But think about the kids' mindset when they hear those statements. It's not pointing to them viewing themselves or other kids around them in a positive way. They hear, I'm a burden, or I'm an inconvenience. They don't hear, I'm a gift. They hear, my parents don't get to be and do what they want to do because I'm around. Like, that's what they hear. I want us to write this down. Children are to be received as an expression of God's goodness and grace, not as a burden or an inconvenience. And I think this means all children, not just our own. I think some parents might say it's really easy for us to view our own kids as a gift, but not those other kids. their parents don't parent them right. I don't like those kids, or whatever you want to say, right? It's sometimes that's in our mind, and it's not just our kids. We should be viewing all children as an expression of God's goodness and grace. And when we view it this way, it completely changes how we see them. And this is something that the church should look significantly different from the culture that we're in. The culture today very loudly says children are a burden, children are an inconvenience, and this world is way too bad to bring kids into. I think we as a church say that a lot as well, because the world is pretty rough, and it doesn't seem great to bring kids into. But it's really easy to fall into that trap. But our job as a church is to change that narrative. So instead of saying this world is way too bad to bring kids into, we need to say children bring hope into a hopeless world, and they build the church. And instead of my children need me all the time, and I'm constantly having to discipline them, think children teach us a new depth to our view of God as Father. And instead of constantly wishing for your kids to be in the next stage of life, realize that children provide childlike faith, and they provide the opportunities for us to see that. A couple of weeks ago, I was unloading the dishwasher, and Emerson was my 2-year-old. He was playing in the living room with a big box that we had gotten diapers in earlier that day, and he was just playing, crawling in and out, talking. I wasn't really paying much attention, and all of a sudden I hear him say, "Jesus, come in here." I turn around, and he's just sitting in the box. And I said, "Did you just ask Jesus to come play with you?" And he said, "Yeah, I want Jesus to come play with me." In my mind, I chuckle at first, right? Like, that to us, that sounds silly. And I was like, well, have fun playing with Jesus. And then I went back to unloading the dishwasher. And I'm like, I hope he's not disappointed that Jesus isn't going to just show up in the box with him. Like, that's kind of what went through my mind. But then immediately I was like, stopped. And it was like, no, like, wow. That's exactly what it looks like to invite Jesus into whatever you're doing, to invite him into the tiny little meaningless task or play with him. And that's when I realized that's childlike faith, right? My child, my 2-year-old, pointed me to Jesus in such a simple and highly impactful way by inviting Jesus to come play with him in a box. Matthew 18 says, "At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them, and said, 'Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is greatest in the kingdom of heaven.'" So Jesus is saying that we must become like children. We must humble ourselves like children. So even though, like I said, it sounded silly that Emerson's inviting Jesus into the box, that's actually exactly what we should be doing. So my next thought was, Jesus, come unload the dishwasher with me. And that sounds really silly, but and also we know he's always with us, right? But saying that, it's like literally inviting him in to that moment and saying, we want to be with you, not just you be with me. Matthew goes on to say, I need to say this. One more fill in before I go on to the next part. Children teach us what it means to have childlike faith. And when we have this perspective, again, it completely changes how we see children. They become less of a burden and more of a tool to point us to Jesus. And we can learn to have that perspective. I think we'll see it a lot more than we realize. Matthew goes on to say, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned into the depth of the sea. That's a deep verse. But Jesus values children. We can see that very clearly. And they are a gift. And he says in that verse right there, to receive a child is to receive Jesus. When we view children as a gift from God, it changes how we interact with them.
Yeah, so let's go back to Psalm 127. That psalm that we read together. It says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them, and he shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies at the gate. And I just love this imagery in this psalm because, like arrows in the hand of the warrior. I just think that's such a cool image, especially as a dude. Like, that's just a really cool picture to me. And I also think it's a cool image because in our culture, we value warriors. We value soldiers, largely in part because of the weight and the responsibility that they carry. Like a warrior has to be dependable because there's other people around him that are counting on his protection. A warrior has to train his body and his mind to be prepared for whatever he's walking into. He has to be ready to face what's ahead. And so here, when the psalmist writes that children are like the tools in the hands of a warrior, it should stand out to us. Because he's comparing the role of a parent to that of someone who is responsible, dependable, protector, leading someone else into what may come. So what does that look like for us as parents to resemble this highly skilled warrior? Well, I think one thing is that Tony mentioned last week. He was talking about Daniel. And he said Daniel did not let the culture define his character. And so when we think about what Daniel did do instead, Daniel, he trained his flesh to trust in the Lord. Right? He didn't eat certain things. He trained his flesh to trust in the Lord. And he was dependable to his friends. He brought up Shadrach and Benny, and helped them along their road as well. And Daniel, he took ownership of his faith in God in spite of the circumstances that he found himself in. And so write this down. To be a warrior parent is to allow the presence of God to shape our character and to shape who we are. So that's what we do as parents. We shape our character. And if we have an angry character, then we're going to more often respond out of anger to our children. Right? If we have a hurried character, then when we're disciplining our kids, we're going to focus on the immediate action that needs to happen, the surface level issue of whatever's going on, and we're going to skip past and rush over the slowed and unhurried response of tackling the root heart issue of sin. But when our character reflects the character of God, we begin to respond to our children in God-like ways. It changes things. And so as a warrior parent, we train ourselves to reflect the character of God. Warriors train themselves, but they also train others around them. And in Proverbs 22:6, it says this: train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. See, our children, they have a calling in their life. They have a direction that God is leading them, that God is pointing them to in their life. And we get to be a part of training them up in that direction. This path is the way that they should go. And over the course of their childhood, we are preparing them. We are building them up. We are strengthening them up, just like a warrior helps his other warriors around him to prepare for what may come. Pointing them to what their fullest potential is, aiming them, much like a warrior aims his bow at the target. And so I want us to think about that image again. Arrows in the hands of a warrior. But this time, I want us to think about it from the perspective of an arrow. So when we think about an arrow doesn't just find its way to the target. you have to aim it. And aiming takes intentionality. It takes purpose. It takes practice. It takes knowing what the target is. You know, I had an idea next year for Forge that when Ed and Jason are out there shooting their bows, I think they shoot first, and then the rest of us tell them what the target is so that we actually have a chance of competing with them next year. Because the reality is, if you are shooting an arrow and you don't know what the target is, you will miss it every single time. There's no way to know how to hit the target if you don't know what you're aiming for. I think that gets even harder when we think about sometimes archers aim at things that are moving. Right? So a moving target, you can't just aim at where the target is. You have to have the forethought to know where the target is going to be and how your arrow is going to fly so that they can hit at just the right time and match up in just the right moment. I think the last thing about this image that's really cool is that after all this preparation, after all of this aiming, after all of thinking about where this arrow is going to go, what happens? The line snaps, and what happens next? The arrow leaves. It's launched. The archer no longer has control in that moment. It's sent. There's a resource I was introduced to shortly after we were pregnant with Emerson, our first. And it is this absolutely brutal graph that shows how many weeks you have remaining with your child before they turn 18. And what's even worse is the authors of this resource, they encourage you to buy a jar or buy some kind of container and fill it with marbles. And every week you take a marble out so you can visually see your time with your child decreasing while they're in your home. It's brutal. And at birth, there is roughly 939 weeks that you have with your child before they turn 18. It seems like a big number, but I think we also know that those weeks can fly by really, really quickly. Halfway through at age 9, there's only 470 weeks remaining with our children, and by the time they turn 13, you only have 260 weeks to point your teenagers in the way that they should go and train them up. And as teenagers, to only have 260 weeks doesn't seem like enough time. Doesn't seem like very much time at all, especially because I have heard that those weeks go by even quicker. And I say that not as this ominous warning or like this Debbie Downer moment this morning that we're losing time, but to say that if we have that in our mindset, then it changes every moment we have with our kids. Because as we see that jar emptying as the marbles are being taken out, and we recognize that we are 1 week down, we have 1 week less, we're down to 200, to 100, to 50, to the final weeks before they move out. It changes how intentional we are in that moment. So, like arrows in the hands of the warrior, is the image of a parent making thousands of adjustments and corrections, learning and knowing their child's heart, helping them to discover their calling, teaching them what the good life is all about, and directing them in what is life-giving over what is just life-pleasing, to then one day launch them into their own, whatever that may be. It is years of aiming towards the target. So it's so important to just be constantly aware of what we are aiming towards. Because the thing is that it doesn't matter how well an archer aims. Like I said, if you don't know the target, you're going to miss every single time. And if we just lose sight of the target for just a moment, it's easy for our aim to begin to drift. And we slowly drift and drift to the point we just go along to get along with other parenting norms that our culture has made common. I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all target for our kids or for our families. I think just like I have different God-given gifts than you do. That's a good thing. My kids react differently than yours will. They learn differently. They think differently. They speak differently. We all have different specific callings in our life that lead us down different paths in different places. And so this means that God is going to use our families in different and unique ways. And all that to say that I think the target that we are all aiming for is, in general, to trust in Jesus, but specifically looks very different for all of our families. But I do think that no matter what our target is, it takes a lot of intentionality to discover and to aim our families in that direction. And like I said, I love this imagery of the archer shooting his arrow, having direction and training them up. I love the implications of that we've been talking about so far. But I also think it is really, really difficult to take that concept and apply it in meaningful ways to the kids around us. So how do we actually take time to train up our children and send them in the way that they need to go, the way that God is calling them? I think Brittany and I have really relied on this thing called just a family mission or family mission statement. And, it has helped us shape some intentional moments with our kids, but also just in making decisions as a family. It's helped us to just focus and recenter what is important to us. And, I know we are 2.5 years into this parenting thing. So just to let you know, we stole this from parents who were much further along the road than us. It's from a ministry called Dad Tired that's for dads. He was in a podcast with another pastor who was developing this curriculum for Christian manliness for his son so that he was prepared to leave the house. Pretty much what we're talking about. And so they both were talking about just having a family mission and how it drives them towards the goal. They're a great resource if you're into that kind of thing, but my point is that a family mission is used by all kinds of parents in all kinds of seasons, in all kinds of stages of parenting. And so this is what it is, right? So just like how a company discerns their why or their reasoning of what they do, they think about and they develop language surrounding what we do and our purpose behind doing it. Right? They create a mission statement. Through discernment with the Lord, taking time with your spouse, maybe even your kids, we can form a similar statement where it is a driving factor that is a tangible why and a tangible how into what God is leading our family towards. And we write it down and define what these things are that help move us forward. And I'll just share ours. Ours are 3 simple statements. It's to know and trust Jesus more deeply. It's to raise disciples and make disciples. And it's to foster a generous home. And I don't say that because we have it figured out, but to say that they're simple. They are really simple, and they help us focus on what God is calling our family towards. And so I just want to encourage you this morning to ask yourself, what are the things that God is leading you and your children towards? What is the target that he is setting before you specifically? Just like we have the phrase to belong, believe, and begin here at the crossing, use a family mission statement or family mission to guide you towards acting upon it. And then when the things in day-to-day life come up, we can ask ourselves, does this lead us towards the goal? Is the way that we are signing up for sports and the way that we're filling our schedule, does it reflect the end goal that we want our kids to have of knowing Jesus? Is the way that we do dinner time effective in teaching our children that we love them and that we care for them and that we're here with them? Is the way that we maybe even do Christmas presents effective in teaching that Jesus came for them? And here's the deal. I don't have the answer specifically on what that looks like, but I do know that being intentional in that moment and being able to say, absolutely, yes, what we are doing points our kids to Jesus. Yes, the things that I'm doing, other people around me can know Jesus because of it. That's the intentionality that comes with knowing the target and constantly aiming yourself and your children back towards it.
So, like Tony is always the presence of God. It's doing things His way and expecting His results because of who He is. We've talked about how Jesus views kids and how we should view kids because of that. We've talked about what it looks like to know Jesus in a way that we can train our kids in the way that they should go, and what that means for us. But what does it look like to live in the blessing of parenting? We live in the blessing of parenting when we hand over control to Jesus in the way we parent. And by doing this, we say our kids are not our own. And we accept the fact that our kids are not our own. When we change our perspective from this, we move from the idea that these are my kids, so I can parent however I want, to the idea of God gave me these kids, so God, please show me how you want me to parent them. Please lead me in the way that I should go parenting my kids. When we see our kids through the lens of they're my kids and they're not God's kids, we oftentimes feel like when they're successful, we're successful. Or when they achieve, we achieve. And then on the flip side, when they fail, that means we fail as parents. And that's kind of the mindset we have whenever we say, these are my kids, so I can do what I want. Again, these aren't necessarily bad parenting. It doesn't mean that we're parenting bad if we are viewing it in that way. But ultimately, God's plan for us as parents is to be a tool that He uses in the lives of the children that He's entrusted to us. And also in the lives of the children that are around us. Because He can use, we're in a circle with a lot of other parents that have a lot of other kids. And we're very aware that He can use some of those other couples to speak into our kids. Or He can use some of our friends that don't have kids to speak into our kids. So this is not just for parents. It's how we view children in general. The success is not found in, are my kids successful, or did my kids achieve something? It's found in, how is God working in their lives? And seeing that. So instead of what can I do for my kids and what can my kids do for me, it's what is God doing in my kids and how can God use me in the life of my kids? When it comes to parenting, and really every area of our life, I think something we need to ask ourselves on a regular basis is, what is the will and plan of the one who sent me? What is the will and plan for God in my life? I think we often recognize that our children are not our own, and we say that, even though it's hard sometimes. But what does that look like in the daily moment? Sometimes it's hard to actually put that into practice in just the daily small moments of life. To represent God and His character in everything we do and say. What does that look like? Something that we say to Emerson and Hattie often is, Mommy and Daddy love you, and Jesus loves you even more than we do. And there's nothing you can ever do to change any one of those things. And we'll just say this randomly. Nathan usually says it when he's tucking Emerson in every night. And this is just a simple thing, but we're ingraining in him, in both of them, that Jesus loves them even more than we do, and they can't change that. They can't change the fact that we're going to love them any less, or that Jesus is going to ever love them any less. I think another way to represent God in the way that we parent is to seek to parent the heart instead of just the action. I think with the busyness of life and just parenting and trying to figure out, and sometimes we think we've got to figure it out, and then it's new. And I'm already realizing that with a 2-year-old. So I'm sure it's that way for the rest of your life, that you always think you've got it figured out and then it's going to change. So I think in all of that, it's really easy just to fix the action with a Band-Aid instead of seeking to parent the heart, instead of seeking God, seeking His wisdom, trying to discern what's really the root issue here. Why do they keep hitting? Why do they keep acting out in school? Why? Whatever. Because it's usually more than just the action, right? And so when we seek to parent God's way and seek to view them as His and not our own, that's the lens that we're trying to look through. We take the time to slow down and learn the hearts of our kids. This perspective shift is huge because it doesn't just help us to realize our kids are not our own, but it also changes the outcome, or it also shifts the outcome to Jesus. And I think we all know that we can do as much. We can be the best parents in the world. You can be the best parents in the world. And we can say that even if my kids don't do what I want them to do, or they don't end up on the path that we hoped that they would go, that's not on us. If we feel like we did everything right. Like, we can say that, but in the moment, it's often hard to feel like the outcome is actually in God's hand. We want to take the outcome on us, and we want to control the outcome. We're realizing that we can't control the outcome, and it's ultimately Jesus that's going to do that. When we live in the blessing of parenting and desire to parent God's way, we're looking to Him for direction in everything we do, and we're expecting His results, and that's how we live in the blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, blessing of God in our parenting is that perspective shift. And it's something that leads us into a deeper relationship with God, our Father. And so as we think about our children are not our own, we can also think about that we are more like our kids than not. So I want you to think about this quote. The Christian posture is reaching out to the outstretched hand of the Father and just taking little baby steps towards Him as you follow Him. That's the posture that we have as believers. And our best parenting comes whenever we think less about being the parents of our children and more about being the children of God. I think one of the greatest blessings in being a parent is being reminded over and over and over and over again of the depth of God's love for us. That as I discipline and teach and walk with and lead my child, God is reminding me that He is leading me and disciplining me and teaching me and walking with me all along the way. We understand more deeply of how proud God is of us when we walk in His ways, because I understand when Emerson finally understands something I'm trying to teach him, I am so proud of him in that moment. How much more is the Father proud of me when we follow Him? I understand the patience of God and how patient He is with me when time after time after time I get to be patient with my son and enjoy those moments of telling him the same thing over and over and over again. I understand God's patience in that moment because our reflection, our relationship with our kids is a reflection of the relationship that we have with the Father. When we understand that, we realize that God is the one who is actively shaping not just our kids, but through us, but He's shaping our hearts. He's using us to shape the hearts of our kids. And so, talking about living in the blessing of God as we parent in the early seasons of life, it's hard. I don't think anyone would say that it isn't hard. It is absolutely hard, but it is a blessing because Jesus is there with us to do it, and that is the blessing. The blessing of God is always the presence of God. So, It is for him that we parent our kids, and it is also in him that our hearts and our kids' hearts are changed.
Like we said at the beginning, that summary that we started with at the very beginning, children are a gift from God, and how you view them, that is, as gifts or not, shapes how you interact with, parent, and steward the children God has placed in your life. When we lead and parent this way, God's way, we are drawn into a deeper relationship with the Father and live in the blessings of God. We just want to take a few minutes here at the end before we leave to just sit and listen to what God might be saying to us this morning. We have a few questions that we're going to read, but we're just going to take some time and, like I said, be quiet and still before Jesus and listen to what he might be saying. Maybe we ask ourselves, have I embraced how culture views children instead of how God views children? Do I know my target? And am I aiming myself and my children in that direction through the way that I'm living right now? And am I missing out on the blessed life because I'm trying to control my children and my life? God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you value children. We thank you that we get the opportunity to learn from them. I pray as we go about this week, God, that you would just work that in us, that we would be able to grasp more deeply how you view kids, and that we would be able to grasp more deeply how you love us because of how we love our kids. Pray that you would help us to see those little tasks that we have to do this week, that we do over and over, that you would just help us to start to see those as gospel opportunities, that we would learn how to intentionally live out what you have for us. Pray that you would work that in us as we seek to do it your way, as we seek to live life and parent your way. In your name, amen. If you're able, can we all just stand and we're going to read this verse together as we leave out this week? Just a blessing over us as we start our week. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Happy Mother's Day. Have a blessed week.